Hello and welcome to season 2 of the NGO Whisperer Show. My name is Carolyne Opinde. I am the founder of the NGO Whisperer. We are a consulting business that helps nonprofits raise funds so they can successfully impact people's lives. Joining us today from the UK in London is Ben Chai, the Doctor Who of business. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Thank you, Caroline. I'm very privileged to be here.
It is such an honor to have you today on our show, and we are going to talk about how can organizations effectively adjust their business strategy to remain relevant and to provide quality services to the people they serve amidst the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. So to start us off, Ben, how did you get the name Doctor Who of business? I'm curious.
Yes, actually, the name came from a lady who felt that I was so eccentric, like a character in the series called Doctor Who. So people would think he's a bumbling fool when they first met him, but everything he said actually came true, and he would have the answers either within a box or out of the box, or using both the box and outside of the box kind of perspectives to come up with a solution that worked and helped save the world.
Wonderful.
And she felt I was very much like this character, and that's where it was coined, and other people started calling me the Doctor Who of business after that as well.
And we know you're not just being called Doctor Who of business just because of some interesting story. You really have experience working in various industries, ranging from property businesses that you run with your family, as well as having worked in the security and information technology, working with Microsoft as one of the first ever certified Microsoft engineers. So you bring with you a wealth of knowledge in starting up businesses, successful businesses, as well as developing strategies for large and also small businesses.
That's correct. So whether it be hospitality or education, training, technology, cybersecurity, I've helped or built my own businesses in each of these areas to get to very high levels.
Wonderful. I also know that you speak on various topics and write, and you're one of the writers for the NGO Whisperer magazine. So this topic of business strategy is a topic that you have so many years of experience working on and advising individuals who are starting up their businesses as well as companies. Now, to take us back to our topic, I received a report from the International Labour Organization, which is an affiliate of the United Nations, and they say that due to COVID-19 pandemic, it's estimated that up to around 25 million people will lose their jobs this year. Now, that is 25 million people globally. We also know from reports within the nonprofit sector that about 71% of donations that go to charities or nonprofit organizations all over the world comes from individuals all over the world. Now, think of this. If people are losing their jobs, they're not going to be in a position to give, because you cannot give what you do not have. And various high-profile people within the society, governments, leaders all over the world are now looking at the nonprofit sector and advising the nonprofit sector to begin to change strategies, for organizations to change their strategies in the way, one, how they operate, because we are now on lockdown, except for those that are providing essential services. And number two, to change their strategies on how they are raising funds. Now, based on your experience in helping organizations, large and small, and as well as in different sectors, to develop strategies, what are the different components that people can look at when they are thinking of as they begin to respond to or adjust their strategies to be effective and remain relevant amidst all these things that is going on right now?
Sure. So a lot of their strategies will depend on the foundational components that they set up right at the beginning. I have a good friend of mine, his name is Peter Mills, who used to be the treasurer of Amnesty International. And he has been the treasurer of many other very large, very iconic NGOs. And we have very similar perspectives in terms of the foundation, that when you first set up your NGO, you have several pots of money. And one of those pots of money is an emergency fund that will keep you going through the next 6 to 12 months in case there is a disaster. So the disaster could be like, for example, in Croatia, they had an earthquake. And that would have affected any charities operating in Croatia. It could be like the current epidemic. It could be like some of the directors embezzling large amounts of funds from the NGO, as we have seen, which is a very public, if you like, something that happened at Oxfam, and you can Google this yourselves. So if they set up the funding in a very effective way right at the beginning by having these pots of money and by creating multiple income streams to the funding, then although they will be impacted by an emergency such as the current coronavirus, it will give them and buy them that 6 to 12 months of time to readjust. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely, absolutely. And within the
just without that funding, you're in a very bad position already.
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. So this funding that they've put aside, often known as reserves in the nonprofit sector and many others, is meant to support you during this time. However, I know so many organizations that do not even have a reserve for 1 month.
Yes, and that's why we teach, and certainly when Peter has taken over any NGO, he has immediately created that reserve. And this is for those of NGOs starting out, you really want to be thinking of these pots of money. So the amount of that you're providing to the charity, that's one pot. The second pot is your operating expenses. The third pot is for growth. The fourth pot is this emergency fund, this reserve that you should have in play. And there is a fifth pot for salaries, but we don't. Some people include that in their operating expenses.
Yeah, I certainly include that, and I advocate for nonprofits to budget for the salaries of the staff who are going to actually implement the projects within the operating costs. But there are also salaries of staff members. For example, if you have a large nonprofit and you have a head office and you have a field office, all the field office costs, whether it's rent or salaries or paying for water and utilities, all that is regarded as project costs. However, the head office costs are usually not, and they contribute as indirect costs that go into, or every donor could contribute a certain percentage. And for some industries or for some donors, they would say 10% is a good is a good percentage to get out of that, to contribute to that. Now, back to those strategies. So the first one is ensure you have a reserve for between 6 to 12 months. What are the other strategies that you think of or may have implemented recently to help organizations get out of or prepare themselves to address any eventualities or emergency situations?
So one of the scenarios you mentioned is like many NGOs are losing 71% of the donations.
Mm-hmm.
And this shows like a dependency on donors. And so what you'll find anyway within any NGO, this kind of up and down depending on the economic cycle that a country or the world is going through. So the second strategy is to create multiple income streams. Now with the donations, you have your campaigns, you have your social media campaign, you have your newsletters or leaflet campaigns. You have people out collecting donations in buckets. Certainly in the UK, we have people for collecting for example, for cancer or wildlife in the undergrounds. And they you know, they have their badges and they go and collect funds. And you have campaigns of special dinners and events where you have a celebrity come and speak, and you have a number of people who attend, and they will make donations depending on how they feel. So those are donation-based fundraising for the NGO. So they should already have these campaigns going in their plans. Now, to get beyond those donations, so for example, in the current environment where you cannot have these events because you can't have lots of people together anyway, you cannot have people collecting under the underground and so on. So you must have other kinds of income streams. Now, there are a couple of others. First of all, I think you're very good at finding grants for people. Some of the NGOs, they want to be government independent, so they will not want grants from governments. But if the NGO is not dependent on, for example, like political issues, then they can look for government grants where the government is really happy for you to deal with the problem. For example, homelessness. In this country, in the UK, there are grants for charities from the government and from local councils. So we've got the whole of the UK, but also from local areas where they will give you grants to deal with a specific problem.
Yes.
The second type of grant achieved is grants from corporates. So these are organizations where their business is to make money. Now, many of these large organizations actually do give grants to nonprofits. And they give these grants to nonprofits for a number of reasons, for tax benefits and to market their own products to people who are socially responsible. Now, if, for example, you find out what charities and NGOs the corporate is interested in supporting, and you can easily do that by going to the HR department or the media department of a large corporation. So go to SmithKline, GlaxoSmithKline, and just find out which nonprofits they would support. You can apply for grants from them. So this is another way that you can be getting funding for your NGO, which is beyond individual donations. These are corporate grants. Or you could just have an association with that corporation, and they will obviously want something in return. They'll want to say, I'm supporting cleaning the ocean from plastic, for example, and I support these charities.
Yeah, or they can come to the NGO Whisperer and we will guide them on where to go.
Brilliant. Yes. So any corporate executives listening to this, definitely come to NGO Whisperer. So that's the second kind of grant that they can look for. Now, the third way of getting income for the NGO funding, which isn't based on donations, is based on wills. And this is something that a lot of people miss out on. Wealthy individuals who, when they pass away, will want to leave legacy to the NGO. It's one that Peter Mills, who I mentioned earlier, has used very effectively within the organizations. Now, you might be saying, why would they want to leave the rest of their fortune to your NGO? Well, for a number of reasons. One, they may not actually have any relatives to leave their money to, and they want to leave it to a good cause. The second reason is many wealthy individuals want to leave some kind of legacy. So they might even ask you, look, I want to leave you all of this money in my will, but could you have something that has my name written on it? Some kind of award.
Absolutely, absolutely. That is a very important aspect. And then in 2016 to 2017, when I was the treasurer of the Rotary Club of Cape Town in South Africa, we had 53 flats that had been given to the Rotary Club of Cape Town as a result of people having passed away and bequeathed that to the Rotary Club. And most of those flats were specifically given to the Rotary Club, like you say, to actually house people who served the community and may not have a place to stay during their retirement or have run short of money. And that is a really important part that I don't see, like you say, many organizations really focusing on. Most organizations prefer to get funding, but they don't go the step further of getting ensuring that their supporters or people who are fond of the work that they do and are interested in giving them a portion of property or money or shares in a business to go into them. So that is a really important aspect that you have raised. Thank you so much. Carry on.
Thank you. So wills, as you say, is very, very important. And thank you for sharing that example, because sometimes I'm not allowed to share some of the knowledge I have because it's private to the NGOs. Mm-hmm. So we've covered the different campaigns for donations, we've covered grants, and now we've just mentioned wills. We've also mentioned products as another income stream. Now, a strange one, which some of the newer NGOs have been involved with, is crowdfunding. But what you can do is have ongoing crowdfunding for launching different campaigns within an NGO, which helps with funding. Obviously, within this current environment at the moment, this is not, crowdfunding is probably not going to be very effective. But if, again, they had that amount of funding right at the beginning, they could have created that reserve fund that we mentioned. Mm-hmm. Yeah, rather than thinking, oh, now I need a reserve fund, but I didn't create it ages ago. Or they maybe didn't have the funds sufficient for, even as you say, like a 1 month survival fund. They didn't even have that sufficient funding. But by having these multiple income streams, they can create these different ways to really keep the funding going during a crisis. The final one I'd like to mention is associations with a wealthy patron or a celebrity who has that kind of passion for the NGO. For example, Princess Di, she was a patron to many, many charities, and they could use her name when they are promoting their charities in their leaflets and so on. And she would actually make an effort to come and show her face and show that she is interested, and as well as making her own donations in supporting that fund. She would also come and give talks at their events. And if you had Princess Di at an event, just think how much more donors you would have got. So by linking yourself with a celebrity or a patron, a wealthy patron, that also works. Recently, I think it was Camilla Parker Bowles, who's married to Prince Charles, has been a huge advocate for women who've been suffering from domestic violence. And there's been a lot of news articles recently with her, just before the virus hit, of her trying to work with some of these charitable organizations. Now, if you have an NGO in that area, I would make her, I would Twitter her or message her or find some way to connect with her, and share with what you're doing to have her as one of your patrons.
Absolutely. And with having the patron, it's also very important that you share the same values with the patron, and that the branding that the patron brings is aligned to your organization's brand. Because there are so many wealthy people, but they might not align with your brand.
That's true. There is a different one that I'd like to just share. So I think it was just a few days ago, I was chatting with a very, very wealthy individual, and I was sharing him about some of the work that we've been doing in creating homes for people who need secure housing. So they've not only been abused, but whoever has abused them is stalking them, so they need to be moved into a secure housing. And the individual was very interested in funding us, and I said, look, this particular business I'm doing is not an NGO. But he said, well, that's okay. It doesn't matter. I'd still be interested in funding that. And also, I would fund the ongoing maintenance of that whole, if it was an NGO, of the NGO. So for example, if, coming back to the Camilla Parker Bowles scenario, if it was women going through domestic violence, they would not only fund the housing, but also the maintenance of the housing and the ongoing support of the salaries for the people who are working full-time in the charity to find properties and so on, to house those individuals going through domestic violence. And that's what this gentleman's foundation is about. He just wants to build infrastructure to help communities and organizations. They do not have to give him anything in return.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Ben. Now, these are all great strategies. However, we know that a strategy isn't good enough until it is implemented. So what are some of the barriers that you may have observed or experienced while working with different organizations that's preventing them from implementing what seems to be like an easy to implement strategy?
So the first one is knowledge. And when they have the knowledge, then they would know about things. For example, wills, like you said, they didn't know to ask people to perhaps put the NGO in the will. Mm-hmm. So it's just understanding that. Or they may not understand that they could actually engage with someone like yourself to help raise the funds and the reserve funds that they require. So it's just having the knowledge to go out and create those multiple income streams. The second thing is resources. So they need some person who is good with, for example, discussing projects with celebrities. If you don't have someone who can talk on a celebrity's level, then someone will either get scared because they're starstruck, or just because they think, why would someone of this level talk to them? So it's just finding the right people to implement the strategies. The strategies are simple, it's just finding the right people to implement. Mm-hmm. Same with campaigns. I'm sure you've worked with a number of NGOs who they'd say, hey, it would be nice to do this, this, and this, but they haven't implemented. They don't know how to get a room for free and organize an event to create fundraising. So again, those are the main challenges. They're simple challenges. You just need to have either the right people or someone who is just so passionate about the project and the campaign that they don't care if they make mistakes. They'll just get on and work through those mistakes. Another problem that I've found with a particular NGO is the chairman micromanages everything, so that nothing is ever good enough for the chairman, and it pushes away the volunteers. They think, because they're volunteers, why should they get told off all the time for trying to help?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we call that the founder syndrome or the chairman syndrome, because someone feels like this is mine and I'm the only one who can do that. And sometimes it's not even the chairperson or the founder, but it could be certain people who are in leadership role working with volunteers or people who are contributing to the organizations. And so bringing us back to the barriers, another thing is also communication that I have noticed. Some organizations don't communicate the problems they are facing to the people who actually contribute to funding their work or supporting them. So most recently, I've been working with nonprofits, just to add to some of the key points that you have mentioned. Communication is very important, because if you do not tell people what problems you are going through, your supporters will not find a way of supporting you during this difficult time. I was dealing with one nonprofit where the board of directors had to meet, but some of the board members were not aware of the situation on the ground simply because they don't live in the same city as the nonprofit. And so I encouraged them and I said, you need to write a letter to each and every one of the board members, of course, via email, and let them know the situation, express what your needs are, and let them know where the difficulties are, and let your supporters also know what you need at this time. So this is a preschool. They run a preschool, but because of the lockdown, they cannot have children come to school. So they needed materials to be able to continue to provide services to these kids, whether it's printing the curriculum or developing or just massive printing and allowing the teachers to take their laptops with them home. And so those are little things. It's just like letting the board know this is the direction we are taking. And the teachers were finding it very difficult, and the school principal was finding it very difficult to communicate this. And I told her, just say the way it is, because you need their support. So communication, I find to be very, very, very important when you are going through a pandemic, like just like we are going through right now.
I love what you're saying, Caroline, because you're absolutely right. Communication is so important. And, you know, I actually forgot to mention one of the ways of fundraising is through just a membership subscription, which would allow that communication. In fact, the members would expect that communication if that membership subscription includes a monthly update or of how the NGO is performing. So with some of the ones that I support, I get yearly updates or 6 monthly, because I support a lot of children's charities to help them with their education. And actually at Christmas, I get lots of letters from many of the kids that I'm supporting in their education.
Absolutely.
So yes, I love what you're saying. Communication is probably actually the biggest problem for organizations, whether they're non-profit or for-profit.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ben, for these useful strategies that you've given us, opening our eyes to barriers that different organizations may be facing. And lastly, we would like to invite you to share with nonprofits from your heart, encouraging words, because this is a show that's being recorded during the COVID-19, and many people are looking up to leaders in the communities for words of encouragement. Take it away.
Thank you, Caroline. So one of the problems that you have right now, if you did not implement some of the strategies we talked about at the start, is you are now in a situation where you are no longer getting funding, or your funding has been greatly reduced. If I was in your current situation, I would focus on the priority projects and put the everything is priority when you're working in an NGO, but you look at the ones that have the most impact and have the least amount of costs and focus on funding those. Try and get rid of everything that is nice to have and you've been spending money on to try and make it easier for the staff to work in. But speak to your staff, as Carolyne has said before, in communication, and say to volunteers, can we agree to work like this? I know that it's not going to be so comfortable, but we now need to conserve cash in order to help us be effective in these are the chosen projects. And obviously have that communication with your board members on what the priority projects are going to be. So this is what I would be doing right now if I had not created those pots of money and those multiple income streams in that scenario. Now, the other thing we know is that every disaster in the world has had an ending. It's got a beginning and an ending. And if for some way you can survive and get through, then things will be great at the other end. It's just you need to learn how to survive through this time of crisis and bond better with all the people that you use this time to bond with the people that you've been meaning to communicate, but just didn't communicate with because you were too busy and focused on making that impact with your NGO. Many of those people out there who you wanted to contact and who wanted to contact you could actually have a strategy that would save your particular NGO, or they may even have their own reserve funds which they can direct towards you.
Thank you so much, Ben. Really appreciate those words of encouragement and words of wisdom to nonprofits to begin to look beyond surviving right now to see how they can be sustainable in the near future. We appreciate how much research you have done, and based on your experience working with various nonprofits, making time to join us today. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the end of this episode, I would like to encourage you to get in touch with us to find ways that we can help you to put those strategies in place within your organizations. Even as we go through this global pandemic of COVID-19, it is possible for you to begin, and you can begin today. Get in touch with us through our website, and the links are below here. And also for resources that Ben has shared with us, we will share them with you at the bottom of the screen. So reach out to us and communicate. Let us know what you're going through, and let us help you find ways to move away from surviving to being a sustainable nonprofit. At the end of the day, it's all about connecting people, raising funds, and impacting lives together. Thank you.